I signed my divorce papers on a Tuesday. The lawyer's office smelled like burnt coffee and regret, with Vernon sitting across from me like we were strangers negotiating a business deal. Which I suppose we were, after 8 years of marriage reduced to who gets what kitchen appliance. "That's it then," Vernon said, not meeting my eyes as he slid the papers back across the mahogany table. "You're free, Aaron. Isn't that what you wanted? The thing about divorce is nobody wins. Not even when you're the one who found the text messages. Not even when you're technically the wronged party. We were both losers now, sifting through the wreckage of something that once felt permanent. I drove home, correction, to my apartment, in silence. 3 months in this place and it still didn't feel like mine. Blank walls stared back accusingly as I dropped my purse by the door. A stack of Vernon's boxes crowded the entryway, things he hadn't bothered to pick up yet. I should call him. I should tell him to get his damn stuff out of my space. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine that cost too much and sat cross-legged on the floor, methodically cataloging what remained of my marriage. Vernon's college textbooks. A set of golf clubs he'd used exactly twice. Photos of us I couldn't bring myself to trash but couldn't stand to display. My phone rang, shattering the silence. Unknown number. "Aaron Turner speaking," I answered, professional tone masking the fact I'd been crying. "Miss Turner, my name is Elaine Whitmore. I understand you offer organization services for personal belongings." I hadn't officially started my business yet, just made some business cards and a website that nobody visited. "Yes, I do. My mother passed 3 weeks ago, her house." The woman's voice cracked slightly. "I can't face sorting through everything alone." I understand, and strangely I did. Wasn't I doing the same thing? Cataloging the remains of something that had died, we arranged to meet the following morning. When I hung up, the apartment seemed different somehow, like it had been waiting for me to find purpose in the aftermath. I lifted one of Vernon's sweaters from a nearby box, expensive cashmere that still smelled faintly of his cologne. For a moment, my fingers tightened around the fabric, muscle memory of a body I once knew intimately. Then I folded it neatly, placed it back in the box, and wrote his name on the side in black marker. "Goodbye," I whispered to no one. That night, I dreamed of empty rooms filled with other people's belongings. I moved through these spaces cataloging, organizing, making sense of the chaos left behind when someone exits. In the dream, I never saw the people, only their things, their absence defined by what remained. I woke feeling more settled than I had in months. Maybe this was it, my second act, the Aaron who comes after Vernon. The woman who helps others say goodbye to their pasts while figuring out how to exist in a future she never planned for. By morning light, I labeled the last of Vernon's boxes and called him. "I need you to pick up your things today." No greeting, no asking how he was. "I'm busy, Aaron." Some of us have real jobs. The familiar barb slid under my skin. "Then they'll be in the dumpster by nightfall. Your choice." I hung up before he could answer and felt something close to power. Small victories in the aftermath of surrender. 2 hours later, I stood on an unfamiliar porch surrounded by overgrown hydrangeas, about to step into a dead woman's home and sort through the remains of her life. My first client, the first stranger to trust me with their grief. I straightened my blouse and knocked. Elaine Whitmore looked nothing like her mother. Where Martha Whitmore had been all soft edges and floral prints, evident from the dozens of photographs scattered throughout the house, her daughter was angles and minimalist black clothing. She gave me a brisk tour of the craftsman-style home before checking her watch. "I have a flight at 4. The spare key is under the frog by the back door if you need to come back tomorrow." "You're not staying?" I asked, surprised by how quickly she was abandoning both me and her mother's possessions. "I can't." The words came out like a confession. Every time I try to sort through anything, I nodded, understanding better than she knew. "That's why I'm here. Take your time coming back." After she left, the house settled around me with that peculiar silence that belongs only to homes recently emptied of their owners. I stood in Martha's living room, surrounded by the artifacts of her unlived future. Books with bookmarks halfway through, a wall calendar with appointments extending months ahead, prescription bottles with refills remaining. I started in the kitchen because kitchens feel less personal somehow. Expired food went first, then I categorized dishes into keep, donate, and trash. I labeled boxes meticulously, photographing contents before sealing them. The routine calmed me, this systematic dismantling of a life. By late afternoon, I'd moved to the study. Martha had been a collector of vintage postcards, carefully arranged in albums by location. I sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through images of places she'd either visited or dreamed about visiting. Each held a little note on the back, dates, companions' memories. Some just said, "someday," in faded ink. "We're all just collecting moments until someone else has to sort through them," I said to the empty room. Between the pages of a Paris album, I found a brightly colored flyer. "Sacramento City Treasure Hunt," it announced in bold letters. "Make new friends, discover hidden gems, prizes for winning teams." It was scheduled for the upcoming Saturday. I studied it longer than necessary, picturing Martha planning to attend before whatever had taken her happened instead. The universe's cruel joke, making plans while death makes other arrangements. On impulse, I tucked the flyer into my purse. Maybe it was exactly what I needed, something completely unconnected to either Vernon or the dismantling of strangers' lives. Something forward-looking. I worked until dusk turned the windows into mirrors. When I caught myself yawning, I decided to continue tomorrow. At the door, I hesitated, feeling strangely like I should say goodnight to Martha. Instead, I locked up carefully, respecting her space even in her absence. At home, my own half-unpacked boxes mocked me. The irony wasn't lost, organizing others' belongings while mine sat in limbo. I opened my laptop and created a spreadsheet for Martha's possessions, categorizing with a detail that would have impressed my former analyst self. My phone rang around 11. "Vernon. I can't make it tomorrow either," he said without preamble. "Then I'm donating everything." I kept my voice neutral. "Some of that stuff is expensive, Aaron. Should have thought of that before you slept with your assistant." The silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken accusations. "Keep the record player," he finally said. "Everything else, do whatever you want." I hung up feeling hollowed out. Strange how even these small interactions with him left me depleted. I found myself staring at the treasure hunt flyer again. Studied the cheerful promises of adventure and new connections. What would it be like to spend a day focused on discovery rather than dissolution? To create memories instead of cataloging those left behind? Before I could talk myself out of it, I registered online, selecting "place me with a team" since I knew no one else who'd participate. 3 days later, I returned to Martha's house to finish what I'd started. As I sorted through her clothes, arranging them by type and color before boxing them for donation, I realized I'd developed a strange affection for this woman I'd never met. The care with which she'd maintained her possessions spoke of someone who believed in permanence. I wondered who would sort through my things if I disappeared tomorrow. What story would my possessions tell? A half-finished marriage. A career abandoned mid-stride. Books with dog-eared pages marking passages about other people's lives. Maybe it was time to create a story worth discovering. The coffee shop buzzed with Saturday morning energy. Dozens of strangers gathered in clusters, eyeing each other with the awkward anticipation of forced socialization. I tugged at my blue bandana tied around my wrist, the designated marker for Team Sapphire. First-time treasure hunting? A woman with striking copper hair appeared beside me, a matching blue bandana knotted fashionably around her neck. "Is it that obvious?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious in my practical jeans and sweater. "Only because you look like you're planning an escape route." Her smile crinkled the corners of her eyes. "I'm Georgia Lee. Professional grief counselor, amateur urban explorer. Aaron Turner." I offered my hand, noticing how her fingers were warm against my perpetually cold ones. "Recently divorced belongings organizer." Interesting job title. She raised an eyebrow. "I help people sort through possessions, estates, divorces, downsizing." So we're both in the business of helping people through transitions. Her blue eyes held mine a beat too long. Guess we'll be good partners today. Our team completed with the arrival of an enthusiastic college student named Tyler and a retired history teacher, Barbara. The event organizer distributed sealed envelopes containing our first clues, and the hunt began. Sacramento revealed itself differently that day. Instead of just driving through on my way somewhere else, I noticed architectural details, historical markers, hidden artwork in alleyways. Tyler took charge with boundless energy, while Barbara provided historical context for nearly every location. And Georgia, she moved through the day with a confidence I found myself envying. She asked questions with genuine interest, laughed easily, touched my arm occasionally to direct my attention. Each casual contact sent an unexpected warmth through me. "This clue mentions a golden bridge to knowledge," Barbara read from our fourth envelope. "The Central Library," Georgia and I said simultaneously. We grinned at each other like co-conspirators. The library clue led us to a specific shelf in the local history section. As we crowded between stacks, Georgia and I reached for the same book. Her hand covered mine against the spine, and something electric passed between us. For a heartbeat, the noise of the hunt faded away. Her blue eyes widened slightly, and I noticed a constellation of freckles across her nose I hadn't seen before. "Sorry," she whispered, not moving her hand. "Don't be," I answered, equally quietly. Tyler's voice broke the moment. "Found something?" He waved a paper that had fallen from another book. We hurried through 3 more locations: a historic hotel lobby, a statue in the park, the steps of an old theater, gathering clues and solving riddles. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt so present, so engaged in something purely for enjoyment. "You're good at this," Georgia commented as I deciphered a particularly cryptic clue. "You see connections others miss." "Occupational hazard," I shrugged. "I spend my days finding patterns in the things people leave behind." "Sounds poetic when you put it that way," she said, studying me with interest. "It's really not. Yesterday, I cataloged 17 ceramic cat figurines and a collection of TV guides from 1986. Her laugh was rich and uninhibited. "Still, you help people make sense of things. That matters." We rounded a corner to our final destination, arriving breathless at the historic waterfront. Our team placed third, respectable but not prize-winning. "Consolation drinks?" Georgia suggested as the event wound down, with Tyler and Barbara already heading their separate ways. "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. At a nearby pub, conversation flowed more easily than it had with anyone since my separation. Georgia asked about my divorce without the pitying head tilt I'd grown to hate. I asked about her work, fascinated by her descriptions of helping people navigate grief. "Sometimes," she said, swirling her wine, "the hardest relationships to grieve are the ones still technically alive. Like marriages that died, but nobody found the body," I said wryly. "Exactly like that." Her fingers brushed mine across the table, not accidentally this time. "For what it's worth, he was an idiot to let you go." The compliment warmed me more than the wine. How long since someone had looked at me, really seen me, as something other than half of a failed marriage? "Another hunt next month," she mentioned casually as evening deepened around us. "Different neighborhoods, new puzzles. Interested in being teammates again." I hesitated only briefly. I'd like that. Walking home later, I realized I'd spent an entire day without thinking about Vernon or categorizing someone else's belongings. Instead, I'd followed clues, laughed with strangers, and felt Georgia's hand brush mine in moments that seemed both accidental and inevitable. For the first time since my divorce, I found myself looking forward rather than back. "So you organize dead people's stuff for a living?" The question came from Georgia as she refilled my wine glass, our post-treasure hunt drinks having evolved into dinner at a small Italian restaurant downtown. "Not just dead people," I corrected, twirling pasta around my fork. "Divorces too, and elderly folks downsizing. Anyone navigating a major life transition." "And what about your own transition?" She leaned forward slightly, her copper hair catching the candlelight. How's that organization coming along? The question was gentle but direct, exactly how Georgia seemed to approach everything. 2 weeks had passed since the treasure hunt, and this was our third time meeting, coincidentally, for coffee or meals. Each encounter left me more intrigued by her. My apartment's still full of boxes, I admitted. Easier to organize others than myself. Professional hazard, she echoed my earlier words with a smile. I'm the same way, great at helping others process grief, terrible at handling my own feelings. What feelings are you avoiding? I surprised myself by asking. George's fingers traced the rim of her wine glass. Loneliness, mostly. Sacramento's been home for 3 years, but sometimes it still feels temporary. I've lived here my whole life and feel the same way, I confessed. Conversation flowed between us with unusual ease. Georgia described her work with grief groups, her voice softening when she talked about helping people find meaning after loss. I told her about Martha Whitmore's house, how cataloging a stranger's life had somehow helped me process my own endings. You give people permission to let go, she said thoughtfully. That's a gift. My phone buzzed insistently against the table. Vernon's name flashed on the screen. Ex-husband? Georgia asked, noticing my expression. I nodded, declining the call. He'll leave a message if it's important. Seconds later, it rang again. With an apologetic glance at Georgia, I answered. What is it, Vernon? Where's my grandmother's silver service? His voice was tight, accusatory. I came to get the last of my things, and it's not in the boxes. Because it's mine, wedding gift from your mother, remember? Specifically to me. That's family silver, Aaron, 4 generations. Should have thought about family heirlooms before sleeping with Jessica. My voice came out sharper than intended. Across the table, Georgia raised an eyebrow but politely focused on her tiramisu. This isn't about that. It's always about that. I closed my eyes briefly. Look, I'm in the middle of dinner. With who? Vernon's tone shifted from angry to curious. After 8 years together, he could still read the nuances in my voice. A friend? I didn't elaborate. I'll come by tomorrow. Not a question. Fine, afternoon only. I hung up before he could respond. Sorry about that, I said to Georgia, embarrassment heating my cheeks. Never apologize for setting boundaries. She reached across the table, briefly touching my hand. Besides, I understand complicated relationships. Outside the restaurant, an unexpected autumn rain had begun. The kind of soft, misty shower that transforms city lights into watercolor smears. We stood under the awning, watching pedestrians scurry past with improvised newspaper shields. I should head home, I said reluctantly as the rain intensified. Georgia pulled a compact umbrella from her purse. Let me walk you. You don't have to. I want to. Something in her voice silenced my protest. We walked close together under the small umbrella, her shoulder occasionally brushing mine. The rain created a private world around us, muffling traffic noise and forcing our voices into near whispers. Tell me something you haven't told anyone about your divorce, Georgia said suddenly. The request should have felt intrusive coming from someone I barely knew, but somehow didn't. I miss his family more than I miss him, I admitted. His mother called me every Sunday for 8 years. Now, nothing. Like I never existed. Georgia nodded. Secondary losses, they hurt just as much sometimes. What about you? Any significant heartbreaks in your history? She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. 1. 3 years ago in Boston. It's why I moved here. That serious. That devastating. Her eyes met mine briefly. Some endings reshape you completely. We reached my apartment building too soon. Standing under the entryway light, raindrops making patterns on the umbrella above us, I found myself reluctant to say goodnight. Thank you for dinner, I said, and the umbrella escort. My pleasure. Georgia hesitated, then added, I'm hosting a small gathering at my place next weekend. Nothing fancy, just wine, cheese, good conversation. Would you like to come? The invitation hung between us, weighted with possibilities I wasn't ready to name. I'd like that, I said finally. Her smile brightened the rainy night. I'll text you the details. As she turned to leave, the umbrella creating a halo of shelter around her, I had the distinct feeling of standing at some invisible threshold. Behind me lay the predictable remnants of my marriage. Ahead, something undefined but compelling. For the first time in months, uncertainty felt like possibility rather than threat. The package arrived on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday. Plain brown paper wrapped around something rectangular and heavy, my name and address printed in neat block letters. No return address. Probably another self-help book from my mother, I muttered, setting it aside while I sorted through the rest of my mail. 3 days had passed since my dinner with Georgia, and thoughts of her had become a constant companion. Her upcoming gathering occupied more of my mental space than it reasonably should have. What to wear, what to bring, how to act around her friends, I caught myself overthinking like a teenager before a first date. After making coffee, I returned to the mysterious package, slicing through the tape with a kitchen knife. Inside was a leather-bound photo album, dark red and expensive-looking. No note accompanied it. Curious now, I opened the cover. The first page held a single photograph, a middle-aged man in a business suit, smiling at the camera. Below it, a typed caption, James Harrington, 59, heart attack March 17. A thin red line had been drawn through his face. I frowned, flipping to the next page. A woman perhaps in her 70s. Eleanor Wilmot, 72. Stroke, April 3. Another red mark crossed through her image. My hands began to tremble as I turned page after page. 8 photographs in all, each person marked with a red line and date of death. Some faces looked vaguely familiar, like I might have passed them on the street. Others were complete strangers. On the final page, I found my own DMV photo staring back at me. Below it, tomorrow's date written in the same red ink. No cause of death listed. The album slipped from my fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud. My pulse roared in my ears as I backed away from it as if it might attack. This had to be a sick joke. Vernon, maybe. No, this went beyond divorce vindictiveness. Besides, where would he get photos of strangers who had died? With shaking hands, I photographed each page, then closed the album and stuffed it back in its wrapping. The package now felt contaminated, dangerous. I placed it on my kitchen counter and washed my hands as if death itself might rub off on me. I needed to call the police. But what would I say? Someone sent me a creepy photo album. They'd take a report and do nothing. I had no proof of an actual threat, just an implied one. My phone rang, making me jump. Georgia's name lit up the screen. Hey, I answered, aiming for normal and missing by a mile. Erin, are you okay? Her voice immediately shifted to concern. You sound strange. Words failed me. How to explain this madness to someone I barely knew? But then, who else could I tell? Someone sent me something, I finally managed. Photos of people who have died, with my picture, and tomorrow's date. Silence on the line, then, I'm coming over. Text me your address. You don't have to. I'm already getting my keys. Address, please. 20 minutes later, Georgia was at my door in jeans and a hastily buttoned blouse, her copper hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked both professional and fierce somehow. Show me, she said simply. I led her to the kitchen where the package still sat. Georgia examined it without touching, then carefully opened it using a paper towel. This is beyond disturbing, she murmured, systematically photographing each page with her phone. Do you recognize anyone? I shook my head. Maybe vaguely. That woman on page 3 might have been a client's relative. George's fingers hovered over my photograph. And you have no idea who sent this? None. She closed the album decisively. We're calling my brother. Your brother's? Michael, he's a detective with Sacramento PD. She was already dialing before I could process this information. He deals with threats, stalking, this kind of thing. While Georgia spoke to her brother, explaining the situation in the calm, precise language of someone familiar with law enforcement procedures, I sank onto my couch. The initial shock was giving way to something darker, a creeping fear that seeped into my bones. Someone had my photo, my address, and apparently wished me dead. Georgia ended the call and sat beside me. Michael's coming over. He's bringing an evidence bag for the album. Thank you, I managed, suddenly overwhelmed by the realization that this near stranger had dropped everything to help me. Hey! She took my cold hands between her warm ones. Look at me. I raised my eyes to hers. Whatever this is, you're not facing it alone. Understand. Something inside me cracked open. A vulnerability I hadn't allowed myself since discovering Vernon's infidelity. My vision blurred with unshed tears. I'm scared, I admitted quietly. I know, she squeezed my hands, but fear keeps us alert, and right now we need to figure out who connected you to these other people. Her calm practicality anchored me. By the time her brother arrived, I had composed a list of recent clients, focusing on estates where family disputes might have occurred. None of it explained why someone would mark me for death, or why tomorrow's date felt like a countdown clock I couldn't stop. You can't stay here tonight. George's brother, Michael, looked exactly like what I'd expect of a detective: observant eyes, economical movements, and the perpetual wariness of someone accustomed to human deception. He'd arrived 20 minutes after George's call, examined the death album without touching it, and immediately called for forensic backup. Now, in my living room, he delivered his verdict with professional detachment. Until we know who sent this and why, you need to stay somewhere unexpected. She can come home with me, Georgia said immediately, then glanced at me. If you're comfortable with that. I nodded, relief mingling with a different kind of nervousness. I should pack some things. While I gathered essentials for an overnight stay, I overheard their hushed conversation. This could be serious. Michael's voice was low but urgent. These other people in the album, they're actually dead. All of them. Every single one. Dates match too. Someone's been planning this. Their voices dropped further. I zipped my overnight bag with shaking hands, trying not to think about what planning this might mean. George's apartment was in a renovated warehouse downtown, all exposed brick and industrial lighting softened by colorful textiles and overflowing bookshelves. The space radiated warmth, much like its owner. Guest rooms through there, she pointed down a short hallway. Bathrooms shared, make yourself at home. She moved to a cabinet and pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. You look like you could use this. I sank onto her leather sofa. I've never had someone threaten my life before. We don't know it's a death threat. She poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into each glass. Could be a sick joke. With photos of actual dead people, that's one hell of a punchline. A ghost of a smile crossed her face as she handed me a glass. Fair point. The whiskey burned pleasantly, warming me from the inside out. Georgia sat beside me, close enough that I could detect her subtle perfume, something with sandalwood and vanilla. Why would anyone want to hurt me? I asked the question that had been circling my mind since the package arrived. I organize belongings. I'm literally the most boring person in Sacramento. You help families divide assets at emotionally charged times, Georgia countered. That creates enemies. 2 glasses of whiskey later, we'd moved from professional analysis to personal histories. Georgia told me about growing up in Boston with a single mother and protective older brother. I shared stories of my childhood in Sacramento's suburbs, my parents' amicable divorce, my early marriage to Vernon. Young love rarely survives adulthood, she observed, refilling our glasses. Yours didn't? I asked, emboldened by alcohol and the strange intimacy of the situation. Georgia stared into her whiskey. Mine imploded spectacularly. Cassandra was, she paused. She was brilliant, art historian, beautiful, completely unable to be faithful. A woman, I said softly, not a question. Georgia's eyes met mine, something careful in them. Is that a problem? No, I answered truthfully, just filling in blanks. The silence between us hummed with unspoken possibilities. I became acutely aware of our proximity on the sofa, how the evening had drawn us physically closer with each revelation. Vernon cheated with his assistant, I offered, reciprocating her honesty. Classic midlife crisis cliché. His loss, her voice was soft but certain. Any man who'd choose someone else when he had you was an absolute idiot. The compliment warmed me more than the whiskey. When had anyone last seen value in me so plainly? I should probably get some sleep, I said, though sleep felt impossible. Of course. She collected our glasses. Tomorrow we'll figure out who's trying to scare you and why. In the guest room, surrounded by Georgia's books and the lingering scent of her home, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The date on the photo, tomorrow, loomed in my mind. What was supposed to happen? Was someone watching me even now? A soft knock interrupted my spiraling thoughts. "Erin, are you awake?" Georgia's voice came through the door. "Yes." She entered, silhouetted in the hallway light. "I could hear you thinking from my room." "Sorry." "Don't apologize." She sat on the edge of the bed. "I'd be freaking out too." Something about the darkness, the whiskey, the fear. It all conspired to lower defenses I didn't know I'd built. "I'm glad I'm not alone," I admitted. Her hand found mine in the dim light. "You're not." I'm not sure who moved first. Perhaps we both did, gravitating toward each other like objects yielding to natural forces. Her lips were soft against mine, tentative at first, then more certain. My hand reached up to touch her hair, silkier than I'd imagined. The kiss deepened, awakening sensations I'd forgotten existed. Georgia's hands framed my face with gentle urgency, as if I were something precious she'd discovered unexpectedly. When we finally separated, both breathless, she rested her forehead against mine. "I've wanted to do that since the treasure hunt," she whispered. "Why didn't you?" "Professional boundaries, terrible timing, take your pick." Her smile was visible even in the darkness. That night, fears temporarily eclipsed by newfound intimacy, I slept in Georgia's arms, more peaceful than I'd felt in months, despite tomorrow's unknown threat. The dreaded date dawned with me still breathing. Georgia made coffee while I checked my pulse repeatedly, as if my heart might have stopped without my noticing. "You're definitely alive," she observed, handing me a steaming mug. "For now." I wrapped my fingers around the warmth. "What happens when the clock strikes midnight and I'm still not dead?" "We celebrate." Her casual tone belied the protective way she'd positioned herself between me and the window all morning. Michael called shortly after breakfast. Georgia put him on speaker. "We've got something," he said without preamble. "Forensics found partial prints on the album. They match a Natalie Harmon." Georgia frowned. "That name sounds familiar." "It should. She's the daughter of Eleanor Harmon, deceased 3 months ago. Estranged daughter specifically." A cold realization washed over me. Eleanor Harmon, Martha Whitmore's friend. "Who's Martha Whitmore?" Michael asked. "My first client. I organized her belongings after she died." I set my coffee down with shaking hands. Her daughter Elaine mentioned a friend named Eleanor who died around the same time. "Connection established," Michael said grimly. "What about the others in the album?" I spent the next hour with Michael on the phone, cross-referencing names. A pattern emerged. Every deceased person in the album had been connected to either Martha Whitmore or Eleanor Harmon. Friends, doctors, lawyers, financial advisors. "But why target me?" I asked. "I never even met these women when they were alive." Michael's voice was grim. "Sometimes grief needs somewhere to go. You were handling Martha's possessions. Maybe Natalie sees you as part of whatever conspiracy she's constructed." "We need somewhere safer than my apartment," Georgia said after the call ended. "Natalie knows where you live, and it wouldn't be hard to find my place." "Where exactly?" "My family has a lake house, about an hour north, isolated, secure." The lake house turned out to be a modest cabin nestled among pines, with a wraparound porch overlooking water so blue it seemed artificial. Inside was rustic but comfortable, a stone fireplace, sturdy furniture, well-stocked bookshelves. "My grandfather built it," Georgia explained, unlocking windows to let in fresh air. "Michael and I spent summers here as kids." While Georgia made lunch, I explored the property, drawn to the lake's edge. Something about the water's rhythmic lapping against the shore soothed my frayed nerves. For a moment, I could almost forget someone had marked me for death. "Penny for your thoughts," Georgia said, approaching with 2 sandwiches. "Just wondering how my life went from predictable divorce recovery to death threats and hiding at a lake house in 1 week. With a grief counselor you barely know," she added wryly. That part I'm not questioning. I accepted the sandwich with a small smile. Strangest therapy session ever, though. Her laugh warmed something inside me. Definitely outside standard practice guidelines. We ate on the porch, watching clouds reflect in the lake's surface. Georgia's phone buzzed periodically with updates from Michael. Police visiting Natalie's address, finding it empty. Forensics confirming more fingerprints on the album. Background checks revealing Natalie's recent psychiatric hospitalization. She believes her mother and Martha were murdered, Georgia summarized after one call. Despite clear medical evidence of natural causes. What triggered that delusion? Grief can manifest as paranoia sometimes, especially when relationships were complicated. I thought about Martha's immaculate home, the carefully preserved possessions. Her mother kept everything, decades of birthday cards, travel souvenirs. Yet Natalie was nowhere in those photos. Georgia raised an eyebrow. Estrangement works both ways. As afternoon faded into evening, we built a fire against the growing chill. Georgia produced a bottle of wine from a kitchen cabinet, and we settled on the couch, close enough that our shoulders touched. "Tell me something real," she said softly, firelight playing across her features. "Something you don't tell most people." The request should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt like permission. I was relieved when my marriage ended, I admitted. Devastated but relieved. Like I could finally stop pretending to be someone I wasn't. Who were you pretending to be? Vernon's wife, corporate analyst's wife, future mother of his children. I took a sip of wine. I lost myself somewhere along the way. George's fingers intertwined with mine. And who are you now? I don't know yet, but I'm starting to want to find out. Outside, darkness settled over the lake. Inside, something new and fragile was taking shape between us, something neither of us had anticipated, but both seemed unwilling to interrupt. "What about you?" I asked. "Why don't you tell most people?" Georgia was quiet so long I thought she might not answer. "I'm afraid of ending up alone," she finally said, voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone I counsel has someone to grieve." "Who would grieve me?" I raised our joined hands to my lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. "I would." The simplicity of the moment, two people recognizing something in each other amid circumstances neither could have predicted, felt like finding shelter in an unexpected storm. We'd been at the lake house for 2 days when the crunch of tires on gravel announced an unexpected visitor. Georgia and I froze, eyes meeting across the kitchen table where we'd been playing cards to pass time. "Michael would have called first," Georgia whispered, reaching for her phone. I peered through the window blinds. A red sedan had parked behind Georgia's car. A woman emerged, slender, well-dressed, movements precise and deliberate. Something about her was vaguely familiar. "I think that's Elaine Whitmore," I hissed, "Martha's daughter." How would she know we're here? Georgia was already texting her brother. Before we could decide on a strategy, a sharp knock rattled the front door. "I know you're in there," a voice called, familiar yet different from what I remembered. "I just want to talk." Georgia positioned herself between me and the door. "Stay back," she murmured, then raised her voice. "Who are you?" "Natalie Harmon. Elaine's cousin. Please, I'm not here to hurt anyone." Georgia and I exchanged glances. The woman outside didn't sound threatening, but then, what did threat sound like? "My brother is a detective with Sacramento PD," Georgia called through the door. "He's on his way here now." A pause, then, "Good, I have information for him too." Something in her tone, resignation mixed with urgency, made me step forward. "What do you want from me?" "To explain and apologize." Her voice cracked slightly. "Please, 5 minutes." Against Georgia's protests, I approached the door. Through the peephole, I could see Natalie clearly now, mid-30s, dark hair pulled back severely, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She held her empty hands up, showing she was unarmed. "This is crazy," Georgia hissed. "So is hiding forever," I countered, then addressed the door again. "If I let you in, you stay by the entrance. No sudden movements." When we opened the door, Natalie remained perfectly still, as if dealing with frightened animals. "Thank you." "The album," I said without preamble. "Why?" Natalie's shoulders slumped, I didn't send it. Elaine did. Elaine Whitmore. I remembered the efficient woman who'd hired me. Why would she? Because she's disturbed, Natalie interrupted. She believes our mothers were murdered. That everyone in that album contributed to their deaths. Georgia maintained her protective stance. Including Aaron, she never even met them alive. You touched their things, Natalie explained, addressing me directly. In Elaine's mind, you disturbed evidence, helped cover up what happened. The absurdity would have been comical if it weren't so terrifying. I organized books and kitchenware. Rational thought isn't Elaine's strong suit lately. Natalie's voice softened. Our mothers died within weeks of each other. They were best friends, inseparable for 50 years. Elaine couldn't accept the loss. And you, Georgia asked sharply, your fingerprints were on the album. Because I found it in her apartment. I've been trying to track down everyone she's threatened. Natalie's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry. I should have gotten to you sooner. Something about her evident distress rang true. The pieces aligned, Elaine's abrupt departure after showing me her mother's house, her reluctance to deal with possessions, her absence during the sorting process. Where is Elaine now? I asked. That's why I came. She followed me here. Natalie's voice dropped. She's parked down the road, watching. She has a gun. The words chilled me. Georgia immediately moved away from the windows, pulling me with her. We need to call Michael, she said, reaching for her phone. Wait, Natalie held up a hand. Let me talk to her first. She trusts me. Absolutely not, Georgia snapped. This is a police matter now. Please, she's not well. If police come in aggressively. A sound outside interrupted her footsteps on the porch. We all froze. Natalie, a voice called. Are you betraying me too? Elaine Whitmore appeared in the doorway, looking nothing like the composed woman who had hired me. Her hair hung limp around a gaunt face, her clothes were wrinkled. Most alarming was the small revolver gripped in her right hand. No one's betraying anyone, Georgia said, her voice calm and professional, the grief counselor taking control. Elaine, I'm Georgia Lee. I help people who are experiencing loss. Elaine's laugh was brittle. Loss, they were murdered, all of them working together. Your mother died of natural causes, Natalie said gently. So did Aunt Martha. The doctors confirmed it. Doctors lie, they were paid off. Elaine's gaze fixed on me. And you removed the evidence. I raised my hand slowly. I only organized what was there. Nothing was thrown away without permission. Their medications. Elaine's voice rose. Someone was poisoning them. The proof was there and you helped hide it. Georgia took a careful step forward. Elaine, grief can distort our perceptions. Make us see patterns that aren't there. Don't you dare therapize me. The gun wavered between us. For several tense minutes, Georgia continued talking, her voice steady, rational, empathetic. She validated Elaine's pain while gently questioning her conclusions. I watched, amazed, as Georgia's professional training transformed our terrifying standoff into something resembling a therapy session. Gradually, Elaine's resolve seemed to weaken. Tears streamed down her face as Georgia coaxed her to examine the evidence supporting her beliefs. I just want someone to pay, Elaine whispered finally. It hurts so much. I know, Georgia said softly, but this isn't the way. 3 months after the lake house confrontation, I stood in my new apartment surrounded by boxes. Sunlight streamed through uncurtained windows, casting long rectangles across hardwood floors. This time, the boxes contained only my possessions, things I had deliberately chosen to keep. Elaine had surrendered her weapon that day, collapsing into her cousin's arms. Michael arrived with backup shortly after, handling the situation with remarkable sensitivity. Rather than jail, Elaine was committed to a psychiatric facility. Natalie visited her daily, rebuilding the family connection that grief had fractured. This one goes in the bedroom. Georgia directed the movers carrying my dresser. She'd taken charge of the moving process with characteristic efficiency, clipboard in hand and determination in her eyes. I smiled, watching her. In 3 months, we'd moved from crisis-forged connection to something I never expected to find after my divorce, partnership. Not rushing, not labeling, but not denying what was happening between us either. "What?" she asked, catching my gaze. "Just appreciating the view." Her cheeks colored slightly. "Focus, Turner, we've got unpacking to do." After the movers left, we collapsed onto my couch, the only assembled piece of furniture in the living room. Georgia kicked off her shoes and propped her feet in my lap. "Why do we own so many things?" she groaned. The casual "we" wasn't lost on me. Although we maintained separate residences, the boundaries between our lives had blurred considerably. "I'm a professional organizer who just purged half her possessions," I reminded her. "You're the one with 3 bookshelves of psychology texts." "Essential professional resources," she countered, wiggling her toes until I obliged with a foot rub. As evening approached, we ordered pizza and sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by half-unpacked kitchen items. Georgia held up 2 mismatched wine glasses. "Do these spark joy?" she teased, mimicking organizing guru phrasing. "You spark joy," I replied without thinking. Her expression softened. That was unexpectedly smooth. Later, on my balcony overlooking Sacramento's twinkling lights, Georgia leaned against the railing beside me. Stars punctuated the clear autumn sky, distant and brilliant. "I spoke with Michael today," she said. "Elaine's doctors report significant improvement. The delusions are subsiding with treatment." "That's good," I said, genuinely relieved. Despite everything, I couldn't hate Elaine. Her actions came from a place of unbearable pain, not malice. "Makes you think about grief's power," Georgia mused. "How it can distort reality when we can't process it." I thought about my own grief. The end of my marriage, the identity I'd lost, the future I'd envisioned. How differently it might have manifested without proper support. "Thank you," I said suddenly, "for being there that day, for knowing what to do." I was terrified, she admitted. But it's easier to be brave when you're protecting someone you care about. The moment stretched between us, warm and expectant. Since the lake house, our relationship had evolved gradually, dinners, weekend outings, increasing physical closeness. Yet something unspoken still hovered between us. "I've been sorting through things," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Not just physical possessions, figuring out what deserves space in my future." Georgia turned to